A warm welcome to everyone joining this session of the UN Responsible Business and Human Rights Forum. You are tuning into the dialogue, Are Financial Institutions Reliable Accelerators of Human and Labor Rights Practices in Asia's Agricultural Sector? This session is organized by Fair Finance Asia and Grow Asia in support of the forum. My name is Junice Yeo. I am the Executive Director of EcoBusiness, Asia Pacific's leading media and business intelligence focused on sustainable development and responsible business issues. It is my pleasure to be moderating this dialogue today. Just a bit of context before we begin. Across Asia, the agricultural sector has long been a major contributor to the economies and employment of the region. As our global population is expected to increase by another 2 billion people over the next 30 years, the case for economic stability and food security amidst a global pandemic has never been a more urgent one. A closer look at Southeast Asia, where 36 million are now considered to be below the poverty line, it paints a daunting outlook. The agricultural sector is often mired with challenges within a heavy reliance on a complex and fragmented value chain linked with marginalized communities, most often who are women, landless farmers, and smallholders. That said, environmental and social governance disclosure is fast becoming a widely accepted part and parcel of global business. Besides greater scrutiny from the media, institutional investors and customers contribute to ensuring agribusinesses do more to protect their supply chains. While notoriously difficult to trace human rights and labor practices, the understanding of reputational and finance risks is moving the needle on responsible business. Yet, the ambition of seeing Asia's financial institutions take concerted effort to use lending to promote better practices is still a long way off. Fair Finance Asia's study noted that most Asian banks today still do not have existing policies on human rights. And so for today's discussion, I will be joined by 4 esteemed panelists whose respective experience within the private and public sectors will contribute to understanding the role of finance in the agricultural sector in ASEAN. The main aim of this discussion is to identify where the gaps are in financial mechanisms that promote more universally accepted standards of human and labor rights, but also to suggest effective ways to stimulate greater opportunities for financial institutions to deploy greater capital towards the promotion of these standards. And so without further ado, allow me to introduce the panelists for today. First up, based in Thailand, we have Hataikan Kamol Sirisaku, or for short we call her Kam, from Taiwan Public Company. Then we have Renee Korstens from Financial Access. Then Victoria Karanay, Fair Finance Philippines. And last but not least, Ronald Eberhard, International Institute for Sustainable Development. A very warm welcome to all of you. All right, so during our discussion, I would like to make... Oh, yes, very happy to have all of you. So before we begin, perhaps I'd like to remind our listeners that you can contribute your questions. I think you should fill them in the Q&A box on the right of your screen. Okay, and now, so I'd like to perhaps kick off the dialogue with Kam from Taiwan. Hi, Kam.
Hi, Janice.
Good to meet you. Okay, so Kam, Taiwan is now a publicly listed regional player and you specialize in starchy food products. Can you tell us more about your role within the company and perhaps maybe a little bit about how Taiwan promotes human and labor rights practices within the company, especially in relation to the farmers?
Sure, thanks, Janice. Happy to share. Just a little bit background on Taiwan. So we are into tapioca starch manufacturing business for about, next year we're going to be 75 years old. We have 14 operations in the region, in Thailand, in Vietnam, in Cambodia, and also in China as well. So we source about 1.3 million tons of tapioca roots a year, and we work with over 30,000 farmers within the region. So, this is a topic where this is very important to us and one of our passions. So within the Taiwan ecosystem and the sustainability strategy or the sustainability practice that we want to promote is, in terms of the farm development, how do we help the farmers improve their livelihoods? How do we promote the better practices, for our factories, our community, and how do we help our family and our community in terms of having better lives as well? So some of the things that we've done related to human rights, I think one of the basic human rights is in terms of safety. The safety that we promote for our factory workers is we have a very good safety mechanism where we track all the accidents that happened at our factory, and we always look and we have a very targeted conversation in terms of, what can we do better on a daily basis to help our factory workers be more safe. Within our own operations, we have a direct line of all our operations that's related to safety. So all the happenings in a factory is updated real time. And also more than that, I think in order to promote our, the safety and to make sure that we're all it's very, on top of our agenda, whenever we have investment conversations, safety is where we never cut corners. Safety is where we always prioritize first in terms of the investment priorities that we have, that we allocate every single day. I think one of the things I wanted to talk about is some of the examples that we do for our farmers as well. So, we have 6 operations here in Thailand, so I'll start with that. Farmers come through our door every single day. And one of the key things that we want to help them in terms of helping, in terms of their livelihood is how do we ensure that when they come to sell to us, they're treated fairly, meaning, the quality that we measure the roots by, the payments that we give to them, the pricing that we give to them is fair. We set a standard for that, and that's an international standard that we try to implement across all our factories. But also one of the things that is very dear to our farmers is in terms of cash. So an example is that we have, over the last 3 years, we have, worked with a local bank and a government bank within Thailand to ensure that we're able to pay our farmers the same day as soon as they come to sell the roots to us. So that are some of the examples, Jonas, that we've done for our farmers and our own colleagues within Taiwan. And I can, as the conversation moves along, I'm more than happy to help share some of, kind of more examples that I can.
Thank you. If I could just probe a little further on this, what is the incentive for you as a company to focus on these areas? There's clearly, a backing from senior management, I suppose. So perhaps share a little bit more about that, if you don't mind.
I think, Jonas, we cannot think of ourselves as, getting everything for ourselves, right? We can't, because unless we treat our farmers or we treat our customers right, the end to end will, we gotta work together to win together. So we can't just take all the profits for ourselves, but we need to be fair to our suppliers as well. So that's kind of the incentive to us. So every single day, it's not a transaction. Working with our farmers, it's not very transactional. We do more than that. We promote to help them in terms of advising them how to improve the yield, what are the right farming practices they could implement. We also go to help them access the market of agricultural inputs as well. For example, we make the clean stems for the farmers, and we distribute those clean stems for the farmers so they have the right variety, the better variety that will help them improve the yield.
Thank you.
And in turn,
that's
they can
very
come
useful.
back and sell back to us.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So it comes back to you in a virtuous cycle. Okay. Thank you. All right. Maybe perhaps I'm going to ask Renee now. Hi, Renee.
Hi, nice to see you here.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so Renee, you lead as Senior Agri-Finance Advisor, and you are the regional representative in Southeast Asia at Financial Access, which I understand focuses on helping to develop and deliver sustainable agri-finance advisory and technology solutions. So it seems from where you sit, you're like at the crossroads of where, the financial institutions or FIs could potentially do more to protect labor practices. So from Financial Access's work with your partners, is there evidence of FIs in ASEAN doing more to enable rights, enable rights and compliance practices? Perhaps you could share some examples.
Yeah, sure. No, thank you. Thank you for the question. Indeed, I'm working for Financial Access. We are a Dutch advisory and technology business, and indeed try to combine technology, capital, as well as advisory, because that is what we've seen along the way. That's something that has to come together in order to really move innovative solutions forward. So in our work, we work closely on the one hand with NGOs together, with the smallholders together, as well as with financial institutions, both microfinancial institutions and larger financial institutions together to help to bridge that financing gap. Indeed, I must say also based on our experience and based on the reports you shared earlier, the adoption of human rights practices in the region is still limited, but we see here and there some initiatives coming up, and what we see is that it's very important that there is a role of a multi-stakeholder network, indeed, where we can help to bring the NGOs, civil society organizations, financial institutions together. So as a concrete example, Financial Access is engaged in the GREAT program. That's a program in Vietnam. Some of the audience might be from Vietnam or working in Vietnam. It's a program funded by the Australian government. And there, what's really innovative about the program is that donor money is used as a credit risk guarantee to allow the financial institution to take more risk and also to improve the learnings. So the focus in that program is what we learn in our work is that one of the main issues in agriculture value chains is in gender. Women unfortunately don't have the same access to capital inputs market as men. So within the GREAT program, we really try to promote women to increase the access to finance. So we work together with the financial institution, provide capacity building for the financial institutions to create more awareness about potential barriers to access finance.
Wonderful. And I assume the banks are quite receptive to such engagements on gender.
Very receptive. Yeah, what I really liked about the bank, because they said, and we've seen it in Indonesia here, I'm based in Indonesia at the bank as well, that they hire young women from the villages as loan officers to be engaged in the socialization processes with the smallholders to indeed reduce the barrier for women to talk to the financial institution, to ask maybe like silly questions, or to really get to understand the loan product and the process. So the financial institutions, what we see is very receptive, and that's also how we built a multi-stakeholder network where we focus as Financial Access on capacity building for the financial institution, but we work closely with an NGO who focuses on capacity building for the smallholder farmers.
Okay, I see. Great. Thank you very much for that introduction. Okay, now I'll turn to Victoria. Hi, Victoria.
Hi.
All right, wonderful. So you're the local representative of Fair Finance Philippines. Could you tell us more about your engagement work with the FIs on the ground? Like, what are some of the findings from your policy assessments of the banks in the Philippines from a human and labor rights perspective?
Okay. So actually, Fair Finance Philippines is part of a larger regional program called Fair Finance Asia. And our work is supported by the Swedish Embassy in Bangkok and Oxfam. And it's a network of over 70 CSOs and 8 national coalitions. And we advocate and ensure that funding decisions in the region respect ESG, human rights, and overall well-being of communities. So one of our key interventions, as you mentioned, are policy assessments, wherein we use what we call the Fair Finance Guide methodology. So in using that methodology, national coalitions assess publicly available policies of commercial banks against global standards on sustainability, and they will be classified into several themes. And so, for example, the global standards incorporated in that methodology is, for example, the IFC performance standards or OECD guidelines. And for the Philippines, it was actually our first time last year to publish our policy assessment. And one of the key themes that we looked at was human rights. And we scored the 5 biggest bank in the Philippines by asset size. And we saw that none of our biggest banks actually have concrete human rights policies. The average score was 1.1 out of 10, which objectively sounds quite low, but in the bigger scale of things, the Philippines actually ranks in the middle, so pretty average for Asian bank scores. And the highest, or the front runner bank, the one with the best policies, the score was actually only 2.3 out of 10. So even though they did not have specific policies on human rights, they were only able to get partial scores because they incorporated some of the global standards that the methodology also looks at. And in the Philippines, we see that financial regulators are just starting to implement more of these requirements actually to have policies on human rights, on labor rights, for financial institutions, on sustainability. So I think as the years go on and as we do more policy assessments, I think we'll see better results from the policy assessments and from the banks. They do talk about labor rights. They do talk about human rights more in a general sense, and labor rights only in terms of their employees. They don't really talk about labor rights more of in their value chain as a whole. Yeah.
That's such an interesting observation, the last point you made. One of the things I personally found is in our engagements, especially with the private sector, banks, notwithstanding, is that perhaps is it the lack of understanding of the definition of human rights, or rather the scope? Is there something like an opportunity where you feel could be further strengthened from an advocacy, perhaps, or engagement perspective?
Yes, we find that the banks are actually quite open because we did have some trainings for the banks on sustainability, on creating better policies on human rights and on sustainability. And they did admit that they are very willing to learn, but they are sometimes unsure where to start because they can create policies for their own institutions, but they aren't sure how to operationalize it when it comes to external stakeholders.
I see. Yeah, makes sense. Thank you. Okay. And last but not least, the man in the room. Hi, Ronald.
Mhm.
Good to see you. Okay, so Ronald, you represent the International Institute for Sustainable Development. I think you're based in Indonesia? Yeah.
Yep,
Okay. Could you
correct.
share? Yeah, great. Could you maybe share more about the organization, what you do, your role in particular, and some of the latest developments?
Sure. First of all, thank you very much, Junice, and also the organizer for today's meeting and for having me today. It's a great opportunity for me to deliver what we have been doing in the region. So I'm an international law advisor with the International Institute for Sustainable Development, which is a international policy think tank based in Canada, but we have like several associates and also experts all around the world. So I'm based in Southeast Asia. So I'm looking at more focusing on the region itself. And my work is focusing exclusively on the ASEAN guidelines for promoting responsible investment in food, agriculture, and forestry. So this is a guideline that has been adopted by the ASEAN member states, by the Southeast Asian countries, all 10 of them, in October 2018. And the guidelines itself, we are involved in the development of it, obviously with the direct involvement of ASEAN member states and ASEAN Secretariat in this regard, and partners like Grow Asia and FAO is also in the process as well. And the guidelines are developed based on international best practices and standards, such as the Committee on World Food Security Principle for Responsible Agriculture Investment, or CFSRI. And this guideline were being developed to meet regional and national circumstances of each ASEAN member states. It is aimed to attract responsible ag investment by balancing the rights and interests of every stakeholders. And in doing so, it works kind of like a guidance, like a compass for stakeholders to have reference to enable them to make the right decision in achieving the responsible ag investment. The guideline itself, it consists of 10 policy principles, and it well in the scope of agricultural investment in the region. I hope that
Okay, thank you. No, I think it's interesting that there is a strong agricultural relevance. In particular, maybe on human rights, what are some of the criteria, or rather, what are some of the assessments that you look at? Maybe just for the listeners' perspective, it'd be important to understand as well. What are you looking for when you assess or guide, the stakeholders when they use your guidelines?
Sure. First of all, this is a guidance that has been, again, adopted by the member states and applicable for all stakeholders. So the guideline itself, when addressing human rights, I would divide it into 4 main points that the guideline is focusing on. First of all is food security, and the second would be on labor. The third one will be on environment and climate change, and the last one would be on land rights. So on food security, we are talking about the right to food. As we may be aware of, investment in food, agriculture, and forestry can bring positive outcomes for the society. However, when done badly, investment in food, agriculture, and forestry can pose substantial risk for the local community's food security. And there are additional challenges when foreign investment in food, agriculture, and forestry are linked to the food security strategy of the home country. So in particular, as I've mentioned earlier, the guideline itself consists of like 10 high-level policy principles. And in this regard, with food security or the right to food, guideline number 1 is the most relevant, as it contributes directly to it. And it achieves such realization of the right to food by requiring AMS to consider following measures, such as AMS need to provide enabling environment for responsible ag investment. AMS need to develop, what I mean here is ASEAN member states. ASEAN member states need to develop a coherent national plan to achieve food security. It also need to support food fortification program. And we also emphasize that AMS need to develop an innovative rural financing mechanism, including through public-private partnership, to improve access to market and expand rural infrastructure in food insecure areas. And we also require in the guidelines for AMS to consider monitoring the impact of investment on food and nutrition security. So it's a guideline for them to consider what kind of measures need to be in place in order to achieve or to fulfill the right to food. And on land rights, I will briefly touch about what has been contained in the guidelines. So I think, as we might know, the most common risk out of the large-scale private sector investment is land disputes that adversely affect all stakeholders. And negative impacts from land such disputes are more severe in countries that are predominantly rural and where land rights are often informal. So in this regard, the ASEAN Right Guideline, in particular guideline number 4, it tried to achieve a wider recognition and respect tenure of land, fisheries, forests, and tenure rights by requiring measures like what we have in the previous guideline, and in the previous principle, what I mean. So, for example, on land rights, the guideline require AMS to consider strengthening their land laws and land use policies, as well as their own administrative capacity to identify where appropriate and, if possible, as far as they can, to formalize land rights. And we also emphasize in the guideline that AMS will need to facilitate collective, communal, and individual land titling and other forms of protection for tenure rights. And this should be in conjunction with the AMS effort to raise awareness among the stakeholders, in particular the local communities, about their rights, about their tenure rights, and how they can enforce their own rights. And in terms of land rights, there are always sensitive issues regarding resettlement. So sometimes in a big agricultural project, resettlement is unavoidable. So the guidelines try to address this issue by saying basically, if there is a need for resettlement, it should be minimized, and appropriate measures have to mitigate the adverse impact that arising out of that resettlement program. And there's the guideline also requires AMS to maintain fair and transparent land registry system, including through the use of technology to identify land boundary, such as GPS and satellite system. The third one, the labor rights. If I may touch a bit on this.
I guess we can maybe, should we do that later?
Oh, okay. Sure.
Yeah, okay, no, but that's very useful. I think it's very good tidbits for us to move into the next, I guess, topic that I'd like to cover, and that is on some of the barriers or challenges in promoting better standards, because I think Ronald touched on a lot of interesting points around land rights, disputes, resettlement, which is very common in this part of the world. It's very, very fragmented and not properly governed, and so it breeds, for a lot of challenges there. But also, the other points he mentioned on labor, environment, and climate change. These are very often topics that you can't escape when you talk about human rights as well. So it's very good that he laid that foundation for us. Before I move to the topics on barriers and challenges, can I remind our listeners to please key in your questions in the Q&A box so that we can prepare to answer them as soon as we can. Okay, thank you. So maybe, Renee, I have a question on that. From your perspective on the ground, what are some of the challenges that the FIs face in encouraging or ensuring their clients themselves use human and labor rights compliant practices?
Yeah, no, very good question, and a very huge challenge. I mean, if you look in the agriculture sector, like most of my work has been in Indonesia. I've been here for the last 6 years, and I will work with financial institutions. Even often there's no specific agriculture strategy. Not always there's an agriculture department, no agriculture loan product. So even to get to the challenges related to climate, as already mentioned, to labor, human rights, just a product and a financing scheme that fits smallholders is already very, very challenging. What we indeed see is that a lot of companies also don't really have, or don't always have, there's a lack of policies of companies regarding business and human rights, such as policies that even exploit the women on farms, or how to ensure smallholders receive a fair price for their produce, or how can we indeed manage the impact on local water sources, how to prevent land grabs, indeed all very important themes, but often indeed the policies are not in place yet. And even if there are policies in place, then the next challenge is okay, how are we gonna monitor this? What we see that some mechanisms are still paper-based, but our technology will indeed help to digitize the first step of MFIs to improve the loan origination, credit scoring, and the loan monitoring process. So if there are no like software systems in place to track, okay, what's happening on the ground, what are labor standards used in the field, how can we track the employment? It's also, it's going to be very, very challenging. One of the, as mentioned, I work a lot in Indonesia, a lot of smallholder farmers, a lot of seasonal workers, so a lot of farmers that work on and off. So there are no formal contracts, and that makes it even harder to track on benefits, payroll standards. So I think on the one hand the lack of policies, and on the other hand the lack of monitoring are I see it's one of the main challenges indeed to ensure human and labor right compliance.
Okay, thank you for that. Kam, back to you. So in reality, do the FIs offer, industry clients some sort of incentives to focus on some of these issues? For example, sort of like a discount interest rates for achieving sustainability loan KPIs. From your experience, what more could be done?
So I think I'd like to just lay out the background kind of a little bit. Taiwan, we kind of hold ourselves accountable to whether we, serve our farmers right, serve our customers right. But also, because it's kind of our core value. We have 3 core values: pride, integrity, and consistency. So pride meaning that we do everything with pride for ourselves and for our team. In terms of integrity, we hold ourselves to the highest value, and we always do everything with transparency. And consistency is doing everything better every day, always thinking about how to serve our customers, how to serve our farmers better every day. Another aspect, of kind of the people that also hold us accountable is our customers as well. So we serve, we export to about 30 to 35 countries all over the world. Our customers are global, the likes of the global MNCs. Those are the people that are also partially driving kind of the sustainability and the human rights, practices across the industry as well. And increasingly, linking to your question, Jonas, we're also seeing that trend coming across the financial institutions that we've talked to, especially the global financial institutions, where they have approached us, very interested in terms of, the sustainability practices that we've been doing across with our farmers. So we're seeing funding come in with, specific requirements related to environment. How do does our projects make the environment better, more sustainable? With respect to the social, how do we improve the community, improve access to market, improve the education of the community members of our farmers, and also how do we improve livelihoods of our farmers? So for example, some of the loan offers that we get from financial institutions is, if we were to improve the value-added crop within a certain country or a certain area, that requires a lot of education. That requires a lot of kind of building in the infrastructure, giving access to the farmers, for better varieties of crop. How do we do that? It needs funding in terms of, actually physically having our agronomists going to different places, talking to the different local governments or the kind of the local co-ops to get the farmers together to educate them. And this is where the funding comes in from the financial institutions. They're happy to support us to increase the knowledge of the farmers. So that's kind of like the example for you.
That's amazing. That's wonderful. And how has that gone? I guess working with the agronomists to extend better practices with, say, the smallholders or the other farmers as well. Is it very effective from your opinion?
It is. It definitely is, Eunice. So just to lay the context, so within Taiwan, we source 1.3 million tons of tapioca roots. We source from 30,000 farmers. 50% of that, maybe large farmers, another or root yards or brokers, but 50% of that is the smallholder farmers. Everyone wants to improve the yield. They want to sell better crops. They don't want to cut corners, right? But they just don't know how. So we have a team. We started off with a team of 2 agronomists. Over the past year, it's built on to become now 15 of the top agronomists in the country. We host sessions within villages on a weekly, on a monthly basis to educate the farmers on how to plant, what are the best ways to plant. For example, how far do the stems need to be from each other? How do they prepare the soil to ensure that the soil is healthy before planting the crops? When to irrigate? Where did they buy the low-cost irrigation equipment from? And when is the best time to harvest? And also we have agronomists going to visit the farmers very regularly. They're actually on the line chat group where they communicate live. So, whenever there's any problems for our farmers, they're able to get that access to our agronomists who are the advisors, real time. So I think over the past year, we've been able to increase in some areas the yield in the plantation area by about 10 to 15% for our farmers, and that's been very helpful for them.
Yeah. And I guess cloud technology plays a very key role in this as well. With mobile technology, farmers themselves are able to access more help where they need as well, yeah?
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Victoria, your experience in the Philippines is quite an interesting one as well, especially when it comes to cross-border financing. I think you spoke about that some time before. This certainly can be an issue of growing concern, as banks, should be made accountable not only in their home country, but also what they do beyond their shores. Maybe you could tell us a little bit more about your experience there.
Yeah, okay. So as you mentioned in the introduction, that Fair Finance actually did a study tracing cross-border financing. The first study actually traced regional financial flows in high-impact sectors, including agriculture, power generation, infrastructure, and extractives. And it found that in the region, there are over $56 billion in loans and underwriting services from 2014 to 2019. And the funding came from all over the world, not just among the region. And last year, a follow-up study was done focusing on agri itself. And it showed that there is 45 billion US dollars in cross-border funding. So I think this shows the staggering amount of funds and the high potential, high impact of change that financial institutions can have when they actually start to contribute to addressing those issues in agriculture and issues with the vulnerable sectors, because we know that at the agriculture sector, for example, there are over 2 billion people that rely on it as their main livelihood. And we know that our food producers are still the hungriest and the poorest in the world. So there's really, really a big impact for change in this sector. And we see that in pushing for this change, that financial regulators will play a key role when they craft and implement mandatory policies to help safeguard human rights and labor rights and ensure that there's transparency and accountability from financial institutions. I think this is also important given our current context of the economic impact of COVID, because we've already seen that sustainable businesses and sustainable funds actually had better than average returns. So as we recover from the pandemic situation and put in these humanitarian policies, I think it will also make cross-border funding and even local funding more stable.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's true. I think there is more and more evidence that sustainable funds are, just as, in a way, they derive the same or at least sometimes even more returns than the regular ones. But especially if you take it from a risk perspective, that could really change the game for traditional investments as well. Perhaps more time is needed for more people to understand this. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Ronald, back to you. And I'm sorry I cut you there because we wanted to give more time for the others, but I would really like to tap on a little bit more about the work on the ASEAN RAI, which is your guidelines on promoting responsible investment in food and agriculture and forestry. And this is clearly going to be really relevant moving forward. Maybe you could share a little bit more about what you talked about in terms of environment and climate change and how that relates to, I guess, the human aspect, but also any relevant examples in compliance that you've seen so far you could share.
Sure. Thank you very much, Eunice, for the question. I think for climate change, it's really clear to us that it threatens the effective enjoyment of a range of human rights. For example, the right to life, water, and sanitation, right to food, health, housing, culture, and development. So I think it's the most broadest elements which affects a lot of human rights as what we have currently seen. And climate change impact as well is associated not just nationally, but it's also globally as a global problem, as what has been recognized by the United Nations. It associated with not just what we've seen with the change of the global temperatures, but we have seen a lot of natural disasters and shocks arising out of such crisis. And I think in this regard, the ASEAN RAI guideline is trying to address this issue. And in addressing that, it first recognized that the sector, the food, agriculture, and forestry sector play an immense part in addressing climate change. And in doing so, the guidelines, as like the other principles in this regard, require several measures to be taken by ASEAN member states. First and foremost, the guideline requires there should be an allocation of public funding to support climate change mitigation and adaptation projects. This could include investment in new technologies as well as building capacity, human resources capacity, for further research and development to develop climate-friendly technologies. And there is also a requirement for the ASEAN member states to have a policy and legal framework to harness private sector investment to find diverse and innovative climate risk insurance products. This to address what I've mentioned earlier regarding shocks out of climate change, such as droughts, floodings, and other weather-related events that might affect the food, agriculture, and forestry sector. And I think the last one, the guidelines also requires that there should be a specific priority in climate change agenda for the country, and there is a requirement for them to have the investor to pay attention to it. So this could be done through the investor state contract, through the permit, agriculture permit that the country may have, or other legal instruments that could create such responsibility. And I think just to address your other point about implementation, this is something that I need to emphasize, as this guideline has just been adopted in 2018. And we are currently actually looking at how the guideline is being implemented. And in that regard, there are exercises that we've been done directly with the ASEAN member states, which we might not be able to disclose in public what we are deliberating in terms of the internal assessment. But it is now ongoing. So we are looking at how the guidelines is already being implemented. And we actually developed a tool specifically to monitor, to score between 1 to 5, the degree of compliance with the guideline itself. The degree of compliance, it's what I mean here is comparing the national legal and policy framework with what has been stipulated with in the ASEAN RAI guidelines.
Very interesting. Yeah, I think we'll be all looking forward to the scoring, and it won't be surprising, I guess, that there is still room for improvement. I think, yeah, the understanding is still not there as much as we would like it to be. But that said, it's really important, I think, to do such assessments, because then it's very important for the stakeholders to see apple to apple, especially if you compare this against the international frameworks, how ASEAN fares as well. So no, I think very excited to see the changes, rather the scoring results there. Thank you. Okay, I have one more question, if you don't mind, and I thank you. I think we have some questions coming in now, so very, very heartened to see that. Thank you. This, I guess I'm going to just open and see if anybody wants to answer. Is do you think there is a role for government to play and make it easier for companies to work with the FIs in promoting human and labor rights adoption? And perhaps you could contextualize your thoughts by giving a more in-country perspective around this. That will be very useful. So is there a role for government to play? Ronald, go ahead. I see you nodding, so I'm sure you have a lot of thoughts there as well.
Thank you, Junice. I think the answer is yes. It's clearly a yes. So I think government will, what we have put in the guidelines itself, the government will need to require a certain measures to be in place, including, for example, like in a contract between the country and the investor, there could be an inclusion of provisions which requires compliance with human rights and labor and environmental issues, like what I have mentioned earlier. So this could be required by the particular country's national laws and legislations. And by doing so, it's a mandatory provision which the investor will need to comply with. I know my other colleagues which have more time dealing with the private sector will have more factual answers, because what I've been providing is more on the policy side, on the conceptual side, on how that kind of requirement could be inserted and could be required by the countries.
Thank you. Thank you. Perhaps, Renee, you might have some perspective from the private sector in Indonesia or Vietnam, where you function, where your work is.
Yeah, sure. Indeed, no, I think it's very important to really liaise closely with the government. I do think also like certification schemes and frameworks are a very important first step to create more awareness. Like in Indonesia, we do a lot of work in oil palm. We have, of course, the RSPO standards, the FSC standards. I think that's the promotion of that, and especially including that in the agri-businesses itself, and of course that complies with labor rights, environmental, climate change. Yeah, I think that's very important. I think that's at least a good first step. Although it is, yeah, I think to really move things forward, I think it's not enough. I think we really have to think and how can we scale things. And yeah, there's a role for technology, what we see there. Like I know in Indonesia, there are a couple of programs together with the government of Indonesia that they are conducting land mapping. And hopefully that will help to get the formal land titles, and that will help, for instance, in our case, to get access to formal finance as well. And access to a lot of other governmental programs.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, no, you're right. I think the mapping, geospatial mapping is very important because there are sensitivities around it. So the role of the government would be indispensable there if we really want to understand the accuracy of these maps. Okay, thank you. I don't know, Kam or Victoria, I'm sure you have perspectives from your markets.
Should I go first?
Sure, come. Yeah, go ahead.
All right. Yeah. So the way I see the government is, if we're all, for example, Thailand, or we're all within a house, companies are in the house, government is kind of the gatekeeper that upholds the standard within the country, right? So I think the role for the government is for them to uphold that standard within the country, to make sure that everyone within that country practices, sustainability, upholds the human rights. And then once that happens, within the country, all the children within the country, it's easier for them to be doing it because everyone else is doing it. And once that happens, then we'll get more access to the funding, and that's kind of like the wheels are already turning, right? So it's not just one person, it's not just a private sector doing it. The government needs to do it. Everyone needs to do it together, and then we're all in sync, and then the wheels will keep rolling and turning.
Yeah, you're right. I think in Asia, many of the countries in Southeast Asia, which is, one can say more paternalistic in their approach, this system probably works better. As you say, it's the parent and the children mentality works because the government says we should do this. This is the direction. A bit like where I'm based in China too, I think there's a lot of trust sometimes in understanding that the government is setting the direction. But I guess conversely, in markets where there is distrust in the government, sometimes it can be more challenging to implement. Yeah. No, thank you for that. Victoria, what about your perspective in the Philippines?
Yes, there's definitely a role. And actually, in the Philippines, our main financial regulator, our central bank, and even our Securities and Exchanges Commissions, their sustainability and transparency report requirements and sustainability finance frameworks actually were only released from the bank last year and from the Securities and Exchanges and Commission 2 years ago. But before they had released those policies, they were actually already consulting with the banks and with the private sector about how they can support and what the private sector's perceptions were of these policies. And for both policies, I think they are actually trying to make it easier for the businesses by having a slow implementation, wherein it's a phased implementation. For the, I think, first year, it's comply or explain, and then eventually, as the implementation goes on, then will it only be really mandatory to submit all these requirements, assuming that the banks and the other businesses have been given enough time to develop the skills that they need to comply. So I think it's the way of the government to be sort of, as you said, like a paternal encouragement to move towards the human rights, labor rights, sustainability, compliance, but not a very sudden policy requirement that the businesses might not be able to meet right then and there.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Very helpful there. Okay. I'm just conscious of time, so I'm going to open the floor now for questions. Thank you so much. I think we've received some of them. The first question goes to Renee. And it is, how do you think we can reduce the risks of loan defaults of farmers who are considered as high credit risks by financial institutions?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for asking. Very, very good question. And it really relates to the work we are doing on a day-to-day basis. So with Financial Access, we have developed the data to deal methodology. So we really look at on the ground how a farmer is organized. We collect data of the farmers, often together in collaborations with NGOs. And we conduct the credit scoring of these farmers, cash flow analysis, and see, okay, which farmers are eligible for financing and which farmers are not yet eligible for financing. And that is, in our case at least, like the most interesting part, because that's the part where we can create more impact. And that portfolio of bankable, not yet bankable farmers, the eligible farmers we can already pitch to financial institutions. the non-eligible farmers, we can help to create interventions to become eligible in a second loan cycle. So what we do, we've developed different financial models in-house. For instance, we really look at the cash flow of smallholders. If we look at, as mentioned, we work a lot in oil palm. If we look at, okay, what's the production cycle of an oil palm tree? The first couple of years, let's say the first 4 to 5 years, the oil palm tree it's not in productive state yet. So how can we reduce that cash shortfall in the first couple of months? We can look at, in different projects, we are looking at different intercrops, we are looking at agroforestry models to help to reduce that cash shortfall in the first couple of months. And then if we look at smallholders that are not eligible, and again, that's why it's very important to have this multi-stakeholder kind of programs where NGOs, we can help to design the interventions, and NGOs can help to provide capacity building for the farmers. Often with a little bit of training on good agriculture practices, what the other panelists already mentioned as well, that can help to increase the income, and that might be enough sufficient to get a loan in the next loan cycle. So good agriculture practices is one, getting access to land titles is one. Of course, there is an important role for the government there. And then we can think about more type of schemes and interventions, but that's why, like what we see in our work, no one size fits all. Like you really have to tailor your solution to different crops, to different regions, to different commodities.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point there that you made. No one size fits all approach. We really need to see them on a case by case basis. There's so many variables in each farmer's challenge, and so a lot of work is needed, and also international experience certainly counts for that. Thank you, Renee. Another question for Victoria. Many farms in Asia have laborers employed on their farmlands. These laborers often face poor working conditions. There are sometimes instances of child labor on the farm. How do the FIs mitigate the risk of such modern slavery issues? Definitely a hot one. A lot of people ask that question, I'm sure.
Yeah. Actually, unfortunately, this is also one of our findings, not specifically the child labor, but there are labor rights and human rights violations in farms, because Fair Finance Asia also does case studies. And right now, when we engage them, their response to us has been that it's not something that is within their mandate. They feel that this is more to do with the agribusiness, because it's the agribusiness that's directly dealing with them. So this is also something that we're working on from an advocacy standpoint to help broaden the perception that financial institutions also hold some accountability for the projects, for the investments, for the abuses that that happen in these projects that they support and invest in.
Yeah, okay. Does anyone else have a perspective about this? Okay, never mind. I'll move on to the next one first. There's one more question that came in, and this is with respect to ESG investing, where is the primary focus of FIs now? Is it the E, the S, or the G, or equally across the three? Not a trick question. This is something I think that doesn't have a right or wrong answer. This is I think from your perspective as a practitioner in the private sector, or even within your role as an NGO, for example, where do you think the pressure is going from the investor standpoint? E, the S, or the G? And for the listeners, in case you don't know what ESG means, it's environment, social governance. Any thoughts there? And I think we should contextualize it for ASEAN. Sorry, go on.
Yeah. For the Philippines, the focus is really on the E. Our sustainable finance framework really pushes this, and actually our government is really putting the E central to its policies, because as we know, the Philippines is very vulnerable to climate change. And
Yeah.
also we are trying to transition into a low carbon economy. So we see that all the policies now that are coming out really try to focus heavily on the E's. Like for example, we had a policy late last year that there would be no more licenses for new coal-fired power plants, and that we would try to support more renewable energy in the Philippines.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Does anyone else have a point of view? Ronald.
Yeah, I can.
Oh, sorry, it was
Rene, go ahead. Rene,
Sorry.
go ahead.
Sorry, I know it's a very exciting topic, or it's, but yeah, I can relate to that. If I look at the perspective of Indonesia, I see that one of the main challenges to the environment here are smallholder farms or agri businesses related to deforestation. Yeah, so definitely also environmental has one of the main priorities. And in our work, we also work a lot with impact investors, and if you look roughly at what impact investors are more focusing on, deforestation, climate change related themes, or impact investors that are purely focusing on livelihoods of smallholders. Unfortunately, fortunately, there's no right or wrong here, but you see indeed main attention is still on climate and deforestation related themes here. But I hope that will change over the coming years.
Yeah, yeah. I think there is an element to it. There's an element of the coronavirus pandemic also in this, and I wonder if the coronavirus pandemic is actually affecting the way investors see, their issues. Because a lot of people say that the coronavirus is a rehearsal to what is going to happen in climate change at some point. So this is like a dress rehearsal for us, and so they feel that the whoever they invest in will eventually be subjected to a lot of liabilities if nothing is done. But I mean, I think you raised your hand as well. I'd love to hear your view in Thailand.
Sure. I think I judging from the financial institutions, the funding that's coming in as well. Definitely there's an emphasis on environment, but if I think we look into the kind of the granular detail, we cannot just focus on the environment. It's also about making the economics make sense, right? So we can't invest everything, to make the environment better, but at the end of the day, it's not profitable. Or even the social part, the people element needs to come in as well. So I kind of think, yes, start with the environment, but everything again needs to be in sync. It's not like either one or the other. So that's my view. Jim.
Yeah, very good point. Absolutely, I absolutely agree with you on that too. Ronald, did you want to say something too?
Not in particular, not for a particular country, but I think between ES and G, the guidelines that we are looking at, and also from the international policy perspective, we have seen movement towards environment and labor in more developed part of the world, especially with what has been put in practice by the new US administration, and also what the European Union has put. And it has certainly affects the way stakeholders in other region, in the other part of the world, trying to respond to that new priority. I think environment has been a quite huge deal in those two parts of the world, both the Union and also the United States. And I think those, alongside also with labor, has certainly keep up pace. But I think environment is still more, in terms of from the international policy perspective, it still holds more priority. You can just look at how UNFCCC negotiation is going on. It's far much concrete, far much ambitious than the other aspects of the ESG.
And to your point there's another question that just came in related to this is what role do you see intermediaries like the credit rating agencies or stock exchanges or consultants, ensuring risk assessments are inclusive enough? I think to your point about environment being easier to quantify is a very important one. I think this is why also for most sustainability reports or disclosure, the first thing that comes out is the environment, but then eventually the social comes after. But the truth is it's harder to quantify and harder to disclose. Maybe, yeah, from your perspective, intermediaries playing a role in this, in risk assessments. Any thoughts there? And how this relates to the tool?
This is a question for me.
Yes, sorry, to you, Ronald, yes.
Thank you.
Should I repeat the question?
No, it's quite clear to me.
Okay.
I think for the intermediaries, what I'm looking at in general is for the private sector. And I'm just looking at how the guidelines in itself could be used by stakeholders outside of countries, outside of policymakers. So we've been looking this from 3 points. First of all, the guidelines could be used, or similar sustainability standard could be used as a validation mechanism for sustainability in terms of, for example, like I mentioned earlier, we have developed a scoring system in looking how a particular policy framework in a country comply with the international best practices. And on the second part, we've seen that the guidelines or other sustainability standard is being used as an advocacy tool for influencing decisions, including by the governments, by the investors, as well as other key decision makers in order to achieve responsible ag investment. And the other purpose of a guideline or similar tools is to have this as a risk reduction tool in investment. It could depoliticize reducing political risk of an investment. It could reduce, obviously, a social risk of an investment. And in the end, it could yield higher returns for the private sectors to get it out of a responsible ag investment.
Oh, okay, that's really interesting. And is it already available, this guide to evaluate social risk evaluation as well? As part of the tool?
I think for the ASEAN,
it is, yeah.
Yeah, for the ASEAN RAI guidelines, the ASEAN Secretariat has published the guidelines itself and also the tool to assess the compliance of a national policy framework with that guideline. So it's out there, can be used by anyone basically to for example, to do their own due diligence.
Wonderful. Very interesting. For those who are looking at these guidelines, I think, Ronald, do you want to share the link for those who are interested to check it out? Because you did mention it's sometimes not easy to search for it.
Yeah, I can do that, but I'm not entirely sure how to do that through this chat.
Oh, you can just read it out. You can read it out as in the URL.
Oh, the URL, I can put it in the chat box? Okay. I'll do that now.
I think you can. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Just maybe 2 more questions before we wrap up. I think we have about 20 minutes left. One question is human rights issues are still considered extremely sensitive in Asian countries, therefore makes reporting even more challenging. Is there a missing piece of engagement or advocacy that needs to be done from a senior management or government perspective? So how can we engage senior management and governments to understand human rights issues better so it doesn't come across as too sensitive and therefore to aid disclosure? Does anyone have a perspective around this?
Yeah, I can.
Sure,
I can give it a start, and then others can jump in later. I think it's very, very good question. I think it's always, especially if you talk with the senior management, to see, okay, what's the risk of non-compliance? Look at it from a business perspective, like what we all know in the environmental sector, when companies are like doing practices against the climate, then there's a huge reputational risk. Like, for example, here, oil palm Indonesia, a lot of deforestation has happened, similar practices we see in Africa, and that can have a huge impact for agribusinesses on their reputation, which has huge potential financial losses as well. I don't know if that's the right thing, how to move forward, but if we indeed look at reports from NGOs like Greenpeace against deforestation, finger pointing to agribusinesses, but also to financial institutions to take responsibility. Hopefully that potential risk also create more awareness by financial institutions, by agribusinesses to become more aware of, okay, what does non-compliance mean from us from a business perspective.
True, and not only them, but also their competitors, because they are all very much watching each other's disclosure as well. Cam, from your perspective, because you obviously work in private sector where, buy-in, internal buy-in is also important. What is your journey to engage senior management?
So I think, Janice, if we kind of look back before, just to share an example, human rights, I think it's almost kind of like the elephant in the room, right? Talking about it is uncomfortable sometimes. But exercise, so is exercising, right? But we have to keep doing it. We have to keep going harder. We have to talk about it more. And then it'll become kind of the norm. It'll become the culture. It'll become that creates more awareness, right? So even back maybe I think 2 years ago, tracking the safety of our employees, made us uncomfortable because that kind of opens up the whole box of, oh my God, there's so many things that we need to do in order to keep our employees safe. How come there are so many accidents? But those are the essential, conversations that needs to be had, and that's the same thing as human rights. So how we engage the top management and the right people into the conversation is, we let the customers lead this, we let the government, we let the society lead this. So we're trying to comply to a certain, kind of the global standard, for the farming sustainability practices. And those, we have a framework where we will benchmark ourselves, we'll assess ourselves constantly every single day. We'll keep having that conversation, and then it'll become embedded as part of kind of the culture, as part of the conversation, and that will become normal. And that's when action happens.
Yeah. No, I like that. It is the elephant in the room, you're right, but letting the customers, governments, and societies lead the questions so they speak for themselves is definitely an important one. Thank you, Kam. Maybe one more is for Ronald. There is a growing frustration from the investment community of too many standards and too little harmonization. How is the work on the guidelines helping to address this major concern?
Thank you, Eunice. I think this is a very pertinent question, and this is quite practical as well. And just to give you an update, the guideline itself is also being incorporated in the ITC International Trade Standard Sustainability Tools. So we are one of it. But what makes us in particularly different with the other sustainability standards is the standards are endorsed formally by the governments, endorsed by the ASEAN member states. So it has its pros and cons, obviously, but definitely this is something that can easily more acceptable for the governments to implement it if you are comparing it with private sustainability standard. So this is something that is the initiative developed by the ASEAN member states. So it's quite reasonable. It makes sense if we are expecting it to be more easily implemented on the ground. I know there might be some question about how these guidelines are being different with the other one. Obviously, because this guideline is tailor-made for countries to use, and obviously it won't fulfill what the expectation of won't fulfill 100% the expectation of other stakeholders besides the countries. But this is quite significant on the breakthrough, because this is a guidelines that has been adopted by 10 countries. And it provides like a norm in the region that could serve as a reference in Southeast Asia. So we just started the implementation this year, and looking at how the existing policy framework could be further improved based on such guidelines. And we are lucky that this guidelines is being adopted by member states. It receives full support from time to time by the ministers and even head of states.
Yeah, great. Yeah, thank you. That's really useful. Yeah, I think to have government and ASEAN member states backing this is certainly key. I do agree. Okay, I think we've come to the end. And before I finish off, if I could just ask um, each of you to give your statement about how optimistic you are. Say, for example, in 10 years' time, when we look at compliance to human rights and labor standards, how far away do you think, excuse me, how far along do you think would be? How optimistic you are? Would there be change in ASEAN? I'd love to hear your views about that. So what is human rights and labor standards going to be like in 10 years' time? From your perspectives, from where you sit. Should I let maybe Victoria go first?
Okay, sure. Well, I'm quite optimistic that things will keep improving in 10 years' time. Human rights is a really touchy subject here in the Philippines, but hopefully, as the conversation starts to open up more and the understanding increases, that we see more progress in the coming years. And certainly, we hope that Fair Finance Asia can contribute to the increase of these human rights and labor rights conversations, and to improve the capacity of all stakeholders to come together and actually, for example, collaborate to be agents of change and make better impact. Yeah.
Thank you. That's very nicely said. Maybe Kam?
Happy to. So I'm also an optimist at heart, just like you, Victoria. So I think if we look back 10 years ago, all the conversation was about business and profit. Now it's shifted to planet and people and then profit, right? So I'm very optimistic that the next 10 years, we will be having, the conversation will be more different. It won't be the elephant in the room, and it won't be uncomfortable, because we're, as you said, Victoria, we're talking about it more. But I think what needs to happen, and hopefully it'll happen more, is, everyone plays a role, and everyone should know that. And, none of us should say, this is happening because of the other person is not doing this. Everyone has a role, right? So if things are happening, it's because we let it happen, so we can't. So I guess in all, I think we just keep on working together, government, private sector, public sector, and things will improve.
I like that. Thank you. Renee?
Yeah, I think I'm also slightly positive at heart, so I'm happy to be with you all in this panel today. I think I've been living in Indonesia for the last 6 years now in Jakarta, but I've traveled a lot to rural areas. And if I see the transformation that happened because of the digitization of many industries here, like if we look at Gojek here, for example, but if we look at the access to finance solutions here, I really do think that in the coming 10 years, technology and innovation solutions can also help to really indeed improve either monitoring, improve implementation. So that's what I think. If we look at indeed where we were 10 years back, where we can be within the coming 10 years, I think there's definitely a lot of things possible. But indeed, the core, what the other speakers mentioned as well, is to bring all different together, create a proof of concept, create a blueprint, show how it works, and really see, okay, how can that be scaled up and lead to other areas, commodities, regions.
Thank you. Yeah, no, it's great that you can see the change over the 6 years. I think that must feel remarkable. Okay, and the final word goes to the man today. Ronald, your view in 10 years.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's from the perspective of Southeast Asia, from ASEAN's perspective. It's quite clear that we are moving there. ASEAN was established in 1967. And in 2007, we have the ASEAN Charter. And in 2012, we have the Declaration on Human Rights. So the movement is going there. And lately, in 2018, we have the ASEAN RAI guidelines. So the trend, the policy trend that Southeast Asia is moving is in that direction. So I think what needs to be addressed and what needs to be considered when we are looking at the region and when we are doing business in the region is we have our own circumstances, our own approach towards economic integration. Might not be similar like what the union has, but certainly the region is trying to address difficult issues like climate change, labor, and human rights in a way that it is unique to them. So it's very important for foreign investors to consider that, I believe.
Yeah, good point there. Yes, I do agree that it needs to be localized to some extent. The local appreciation for the challenges must be had. Thank you for that, Ronald. And with that, we've come to the end of our roundtable dialogue today. I wish to thank my panelists, especially for being so generous with your thoughts and perspectives. No doubt we'll be hearing and seeing more from stakeholders, pushing for greater adoption of standards on human rights and labor rights practices. The question, of course, is how quickly can change happen? But as my panelists very optimistically said, they already have seen the challenge in the last few years, and it's just building up. So it is probably a matter of time. So for this, special thanks to the organizers of the UN Responsible Business and Human Rights Forum, and certainly to Grow Asia and Fair Finance Asia for your unwavering efforts in this space. There is always strength in numbers, so I look forward to more stakeholders mainstreaming this agenda moving forward. And so with this, thank you again for tuning in. My name is Junice Yeo. Come read our news, which is entirely free to subscribe. That's ecobusiness.com. Okay, have a good afternoon, everyone. Bye-bye.